The CEO meets a 5-year-old boy, but doesn't know he is the son of his first love. The high-pitched cry of a child cut through the air of Washington Square Park on a fall morning in Manhattan. Andrew Bennett looked up from his laptop, where he was reviewing financial reports during his lunch break, to see a small boy running after a red paper airplane. The toy glided gracefully among the golden leaves, leading its young pursuer on an unpredictable dance through the park. Andrew watched the scene with an involuntary smile, a rare expression on his normally serious face. At 40, his life consisted of endless corporate meetings and lonely nights in his penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side. As CEO of Bennett Technologies, he had built an empire in the technology sector, but something always seemed to be missing. The paper airplane made an unexpected turn and landed softly next to his seat. The boy, with tousled brown hair and bright green eyes, stopped in front of him, hesitating. "Excuse me, sir," said the boy, his voice small but determined. "Can I take my plane?" Andrew took the toy and handed it over, noticing the small, delicate fingers that received it. Something in the boy's face made him freeze. Those eyes were impossibly familiar. "What's your name?" Andrew asked, trying to keep his voice casual while his heart raced for reasons he couldn't explain. "Lucas Mitchell," the boy replied, folding and unfolding the wingtip of the plane. "I'm 5 years old." "Mitchell?" The surname hit Andrew like a punch in the gut. His hands began to shake slightly as long-suppressed memories flooded his mind. Catherine Mitchell, his first and only true love, who had disappeared without explanation 15 years ago, leaving only a vague note and a broken heart. "Lucas?" A female voice called out from across the park. Andrew turned his head so quickly that his neck cracked, and there she was, Catherine Mitchell, still as beautiful as in his memories, albeit with a few silver strands mixed in with her dark hair. She was crossing the park with hurried steps, but stopped abruptly when she recognized him. Her face paled, and Andrew saw the exact moment when recognition struck her, followed by something that looked very much like fear. "Lucas, come here," she called, her voice trembling. The boy ran to her, wrapping his arms around her legs. Andrew stood up slowly, his mind spinning with calculations and possibilities. Lucas was 5 years old. Catherine had been gone for 15 years. The dates didn't match up, but something in his heart told him that there was more to this story than simple math. "Catherine," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "After all this time—" "Andrew, please," she interrupted, her eyes pleading. "Not here. Not now. You owe me an explanation," he insisted, taking a step forward. 15 years, Cat. You just disappeared." Lucas looked from one to the other, his little forehead furrowed in confusion. "Mom, do you know him?" Catherine ran her hand through her son's hair, a gesture Andrew remembered her doing so well when she was nervous. "Yes, darling. We went to college together." Andrew looked at the boy more closely now. The green eyes, the shape of his face, even the way he frowned. Everything screamed familiar in a way he couldn't ignore. "We need to talk," he said, keeping his voice low but firm. "Not for me, but for him." Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, there was a determination that Andrew recognized from the old days. "Tomorrow," she said at last. "Breakfast at Bluestone Lane in Greenwich Village. At 8. Andrew nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He watched as Catherine took Lucas's hand and walked away quickly, the boy still holding his red paper airplane. Settling back in his seat, Andrew closed his laptop, oblivious to the unfinished reports. His mind was elsewhere, 15 years in the past, to be exact. The day he found the apartment empty and a simple note saying, "I'm sorry, but I can't." Now, looking at the leaves falling around him in the park, he wondered how many other secrets Catherine had taken with her that day. His phone vibrated with reminders of meetings and appointments, but for the first time in years, Andrew Bennett, the powerful CEO, didn't care about business. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions he didn't even know he had, and possibly change his life forever. The sun was beginning to set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the park. Andrew sat there, reliving every moment of the meeting in his mind, especially Lucas' smile, a smile that he now realized was identical to his own. Andrew stayed up all night, the memories of Catherine running through his mind like a movie on an endless loop. By 7:30 the next morning, he was sitting at an inconspicuous table at the bottom of Bluestone Lane, his fingers drumming nervously on his untouched coffee cup. Breakfast was normally his most productive time. Strategy meetings, conference calls with international partners. But today his assistant had been given strict instructions to cancel all appointments by midday. For the first time in 15 years, Andrew Bennett put his personal life before his business. At 8:05 a.m., Catherine entered the cafe. She was wearing a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, her dark hair tied up in a casual bun. She looked more mature, but still carried that natural elegance that had captivated him in college. Andrew stood up instinctively when she approached the table. "You still have that habit," she commented with a small smile, referring to his former insistence on getting up whenever a woman came to the table. "Some things don't change," he replied, his voice controlled. "Others change drastically, apparently." Catherine sat down, ordering a chamomile tea from the waitress who approached. The silence between them weighed like lead until Andrew finally spoke. "Is Lucas with you today?" "No," she replied, her fingers playing with her napkin. "He's at school. Marlborough Elementary." "Great school," Andrew commented, trying to keep the conversation casual while he gathered his courage for the more difficult questions. "Catherine, I need to know. Lucas is—" "Yes," she interrupted, her eyes finally meeting his. "Lucas is your son." The confirmation, even though it was expected, hit Andrew like a wave. He closed his eyes for a moment, processing the information. When he opened them again, there was a mixture of pain and anger in his gaze. "Why didn't you tell me? Why'd you disappear like that?" Catherine took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she held a cup of tea that had just arrived. "It's a complicated story, Andrew. I found out I was pregnant 3 months before graduation. The same week, I received a visit from your father." Andrew felt his stomach turn. Richard Bennett, who died 5 years ago, had always been a ruthless man when it came to family interests. "What does my father have to do with it?" "He showed me documents," Catherine continued, her voice low but firm. "Proof that my father was involved in fraud at his company. He said that if I didn't disappear from his life, he'd blow the whistle and my father would end up in prison." Andrew felt anger rising in his chest. "And you didn't think to tell me? You didn't trust me to sort it out?" "You were about to take over as president of the company," she argued. "Your father made it clear that if he chose to stay with me, you would lose everything. I couldn't be responsible for destroying your future and that of your family. So you decided to destroy our family instead," he retorted, more bitterly than he had intended. Catherine wiped away a discreet tear. "I did what I thought was right at the time. I moved to Boston, had Lucas, built a life there. We moved back to New York just 6 months ago when I was offered a job as a curator at MoMA." Andrew absorbed the information slowly, remembering Catherine's passion for contemporary art during her college years. "And my father? He kept his word. He never denounced my father, who died 3 years ago without knowing anything about it. But he made a point of periodically reminding me that he was keeping an eye on me." "Why come back now? After your father died, the threat stopped. In Lucas?" He started asking questions about his father. "I didn't want him to grow up without knowing his origins." Andrew ran a hand over his face, trying to process everything. 15 years, Catherine. 15 years without knowing I have a son. All the first words, first steps, birthdays, all lost. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll carry that guilt forever. But Lucas still has a long way to go, and he deserves to meet his father." "What's he like?" Andrew asked, his voice softening for the first time. Apart from the obvious talent for paper airplanes, a genuine smile lit up Catherine's face. "He's brilliant. He loves math and science, always taking things apart to understand how they work. He has your determination and, unfortunately, my stubbornness. I want to meet him, really get to know him," Andrew declared. "Not as a stranger in the park, but as a father." Catherine nodded slowly. "We're going to have to take this slowly. He's sensitive, and too sudden a change could frighten him. We could start with meetings in the park," Andrew suggested. "Let him feel comfortable with me first." "That would be good," Catherine agreed. But Andrew, I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for anything other than to establish a healthy relationship between you and Lucas. The past is the past. Andrew felt a pang in his chest at these words, but kept his expression neutral. I understand. My focus now is Lucas. They spent the next hour planning how to proceed, exchanging phone numbers and discussing the boy's routine. When they finally said goodbye, Andrew sat for a few more minutes, looking out of the cafe window at the city that never stopped. 15 years ago, his world fell apart when Catherine left. Now it was falling apart again, but in a completely different way. Somewhere in this town, there was a 5-year-old boy who carried her blood, her eyes, her smile. A son he barely knew, but already loved intensely. His phone vibrated with a message from Catherine, a photo of Lucas on his first day at school, smiling broadly with a backpack bigger than himself. Andrew saved the picture, promising himself that he wouldn't miss another important moment in his son's life. The meeting room on the 45th floor of Bennett Technologies was silent as Andrew stared out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 3 days had passed since breakfast with Catherine, and every spare minute of his thoughts was consumed by the image of Lucas. Mr. Bennett, Michelle has assisted for 10 years, sniffled softly. The legal department is waiting for your signature on the merger documents with Silicon Valley Tech. Andrew turned, taking the pen she offered. Before signing, he paused. Michelle, I need you to make some changes to my schedule. I want Wednesday afternoons free for the next few months. Michelle arched an eyebrow, but maintained her professionalism. In a decade, Andrew had never asked for a regular appointment outside of work. Personal business, he added, noticing her silent questioning. That afternoon, Andrew drove his Tesla Model S to Marlboro Elementary. He parked across the street, watching the children come out in excited groups. His heart raced when he spotted Lucas, his Avengers backpack bouncing slightly as he ran towards Catherine. His phone vibrated, a message from Catherine. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Washington Square Park? Andrew replied immediately. I'll be there. The next morning, he found himself doing something he'd never imagined, researching how to connect with 5-year-olds. His searches led him to single-parent forums and articles on child development. On an impulse, he stopped at a toy store on the way to the park. When he arrived, Catherine and Lucas were already there, the boy playing in a sandpit. Andrew approached slowly, carrying a discreet bag. Hi, Lucas, he greeted, taking a seat on a nearby bench. Remember me? Lucas looked up from his sandcastle. You're the man with the paper airplane? That's right. Andrew smiled, his nervousness subsiding a little. Actually, I brought you something I thought you might like. From the bag, he pulled out a paper airplane construction kit with instructions for different models and special colored paper. Lucas's eyes widened. Can I really have this? Of course, Andrew replied, noticing Catherine's approving look. Actually, I thought we could make some together if you want. Over the next hour, Andrew discovered that his son was endlessly curious. Lucas asked questions about everything. Why folded paper flew, why some models went further than others. Andrew explained basic aerodynamic concepts in a way that a 5-year-old could understand, amazed at how quickly Lucas absorbed the information. You know a lot of things, Lucas commented, launching his third airplane. Like my mother, she knows everything about art. Your mother was always very smart, Andrew replied, exchanging a quick glance with Catherine. In college, she used to help me with art history. You met my mother at college? Lucas asked, his curiosity piqued. Andrew hesitated, looking at Catherine. She nodded slightly. Yes, we were good friends. Lucas frowned, processing the information. Like my father? Mom said she met him at college too. The air seemed to freeze for a moment. Catherine approached, taking a seat next to Lucas in the sandbox. Lucas, darling, she began softly. Remember when you asked me about your father, and I said that one day you would meet him? Lucas nodded, his green eyes, Andrew's eyes, moving between the two adults. Andrew is your father, Catherine said gently. The silence that followed seemed eternal. Lucas stared at Andrew, then at his mother, then back at Andrew. His little forehead creased in concentration. Is that why you know so much about airplanes? He finally asked. Andrew let out a nervous laugh, relieved by the simplicity of the question. Well, I've always liked to understand how things work. It seems that you do too. Lucas nodded vigorously. Mom said I broke the microwave trying to see what was inside. He was 4, Catherine explained, rolling her eyes but smiling. It was a disaster. The afternoon went on like this, with little stories and paper airplanes, each moment building a delicate bridge over the chasm of 15 years. As the sun began to set, Lucas surprised everyone by asking to show Andrew his most recent drawing from school. "It's in my backpack," he said, running over to where Catherine had left her belongings. Alone for a moment, Andrew and Catherine exchanged glances. "He's coping better than I expected," she commented. "Children are more resilient than we realize," Andrew replied. "Catherine, I want to do this right. Not just meetings in the park, but really being there." "I know," she said softly. "That's why we came back. He deserves to have a father, and you deserve to know your son." Lucas came running back with a piece of colored paper, proudly displaying his drawing of a rocket ship. Andrew scrutinized every detail, genuinely impressed by the attention his son paid to the technical components, even in a child's drawing. When they finally said goodbye, Lucas hesitated before giving Andrew a quick hug. It was brief, but enough to make the CEO's heart melt completely. Back in his apartment that evening, Andrew realized that his life had changed irrevocably. The minimalist walls and modern decor now seemed cold and impersonal. In his mind, he was already envisioning a space for toys, children's books, and perhaps a small science lab for experiments with his son. Her phone rang, a photo of Lucas with his new paper airplane, sent by Catherine. Under the photo, a message: "He hasn't stopped talking about you all the way home." Andrew smiled, saving the photo. Tomorrow, he decided he would start transforming one of the empty rooms into a space for his son. Because for the first time in 15 years, Andrew Bennett wasn't just a successful CEO, he was a father. The following weeks brought a new routine for Andrew Bennett. Wednesdays became sacred in his schedule, and his executives quickly learned not to make appointments during this time. What they didn't know was that their powerful CEO spent those afternoons building paper airplanes and learning about dinosaurs with a 5-year-old boy. In his apartment, the guest room had been transformed. The stark walls now displayed a mural of the solar system, and shelves full of children's books and science kits occupied the previously empty space. A small work table, perfect for projects and experiments, awaited its first use. "Are you sure about this?" Catherine asked during one of their meetings in the park, while Lucas played in the playground. "A whole room is a big step." Andrew watched his son deftly climbing the slide. "He needs his own space, Cat, for when he's ready to visit me." The use of the old nickname didn't go unnoticed by Catherine, who quickly looked away. "Lucas asked about you last night." She changed the subject. "He wanted to know if you also liked mint chocolate ice cream when you were a kid." "And what did you say?" "The truth? That you were always more of the vanilla and caramel kind of girl." Andrew smiled, remembering the endless discussions about ice cream flavors during his college years. Some things never changed. "Dad," Lucas's voice interrupted his thoughts. It was the first time he had used the word, and the impact was immediate. Andrew felt his heart stop for a second. "Look what I can do!" Lucas was at the top of the climbing frame, displaying impressive balance for his age. Andrew stood up instinctively, ready to run if his son slipped, but Catherine touched his arm gently. "He needs to learn his own limits," she said softly. "Trust him." Trust, a word that carried so much weight between them. Andrew took a deep breath and forced himself to relax, applauding when Lucas completed his traverse of the equipment. Later that week, Andrew found himself in an unusual situation, attending a parents' meeting at Marlborough Elementary. Catherine had suggested that he start getting more formally involved in Lucas' school life, and the teacher, Mrs. Anderson, had been notified about the situation. "Mr. Bennett," the teacher smiled warmly, "Lucas has been talking about you a lot over the past few weeks, especially during our science unit." Andrew adjusted his tie, feeling strangely nervous. "He's extraordinarily curious about how things work." "Yes, and that's been wonderful for the class. After you explained aerodynamics, he gave a little talk to his classmates about why airplanes fly. It was lovely." The pride Andrew felt at that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. No successful corporate merger or multi-million-dollar acquisition could compare to the feeling of knowing that his son was sharing knowledge with others. The meeting continued with Mrs. Anderson showing Lucas work and discussing his academic progress. Andrew absorbed every detail, making mental notes about areas where he could help his son's development. When he left the school, he found Catherine waiting in the corridor. "How was it?" "Amazing," he replied honestly. "He's brilliant, Cat. Not just intelligent, but truly curious about the world. Like you," she smiled softly. "Remember when you took apart the radio in your dorm just to understand how it worked? And I never got to put it back together," Andrew added, laughing. My roommate was furious. The moment of levity was interrupted by the sound of Andrew's cell phone. It was Michelle, his assistant, reminding him of a video conference with investors in Tokyo. The reality of his corporate life always found a way to intrude. "I have to go," he said reluctantly. "But first, I was thinking of taking Lucas to the Natural History Museum on Saturday. If you agree, of course." Catherine considered for a moment. "They'll love it. He's been talking about dinosaurs nonstop ever since he found out you work in a building as tall as a T-Rex." "You could come too," Andrew suggested, trying to keep his tone casual. To make him feel more comfortable. "Andrew," Catherine began, her tone warning. "Just as parents," he added quickly. "Nothing more." She hesitated before agreeing. "All right, but let's keep things clear, okay? This is about Lucas." Andrew nodded, ignoring the pang of disappointment in his chest. In the elevator, on the way to his office, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. In less than a month, his life had changed completely. The man who used to live only for work now found himself researching child development in the early hours of the morning and memorizing dinosaur names. On his desk, between financial reports and contracts, there was now a carefully preserved red paper airplane, the same one that had brought Lucas into his life. It was a constant reminder that sometimes the biggest changes start with the simplest gestures. Her phone vibrated with a message from Catherine, a photo of Lucas asleep, cuddled up with a book about planets. The caption read, "Someone's excited for the museum on Saturday." Andrew smiled, saving the image in a rapidly growing folder on his phone. Every photo, every moment captured was precious, an attempt to make up for lost years and build a better future. Night fell over Manhattan, the lights of the skyscrapers dotting the horizon like earthly stars. In his office at the top of Bennett Technologies, Andrew Bennett was no longer just a lonely CEO. He was a father learning to balance two very different lives and discovering that maybe, just maybe, there was room in his heart for more than he had imagined. The Natural History Museum was a world apart on a Saturday morning. Andrew waited at the entrance, nervously checking his watch. It was the first time he would be spending several hours with Lucas outside the controlled environment of the park, and the prospect made him both anxious and excited. Catherine and Lucas arrived promptly at 10 a.m. The boy was wearing an Avengers t-shirt and sneakers that flashed with every step, his morning energy contagious. "Dad, did you know that the T-Rex had teeth the size of bananas?" Lucas boomed as soon as he saw them, jumping up and down excitedly. "Actually," Andrew replied, naturally getting into the teacher mode he was developing with his son. "Some teeth were as long as 30 centimeters. Lucas's eyes widened at the information, and Catherine couldn't help but smile at the interaction between father and son. Andrew had clearly done his homework, preparing himself for the inevitable questions about dinosaurs. Inside the museum, Lucas led the way, dragging Andrew from exhibit to exhibit. His curiosity was insatiable, and each new discovery generated a flurry of questions that Andrew answered patiently and enthusiastically. "Look, Dad, it's like that book you gave me about the solar system," Lucas exclaimed in the meteorite section, pressing his face against the protective glass. Catherine watched the scene with mixed emotions. It was undeniable that Andrew and Lucas had developed a natural connection, as if the lost years could be partially compensated for by the intensity of the bond that was forming. During lunch in the museum cafeteria, while Lucas was enjoying his dinosaur-shaped sandwich, Catherine noticed Andrew watching her. "What is it?" she asked, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I was remembering the last time we came here," he replied softly. "In our third year at university, you spent hours drawing fossils for an art project." And you kept trying to understand how the preservation systems worked, she added, the memory clear in her mind. Some things really don't change. Mom draws a lot too, Lucas interrupted, breadcrumbs on his face. She does beautiful paintings in her studio. You have a studio? Andrew asked, genuinely interested. Catherine nodded. A small space in Brooklyn. I teach art to children on Saturday mornings and use the rest of the time for my own work. She's having an exhibition, Lucas announced proudly. With big paintings like this. He spread his arms as wide as he could to demonstrate. Andrew noticed the blush on Catherine's cheeks. It's just a small gallery in Williamsburg, she minimized. When's the opening, he asked. Next Friday, she replied hesitantly. Lucas is staying with the nanny. I could stay with him, Andrew offered quickly. If you agree, of course. We could have a pizza and science night at my apartment. Lucas's face lit up. Can we really? Please, Mom. Catherine bit her lip, considering. It was a big step, letting Lucas spend the night with Andrew. But her son was clearly excited about the idea, and Andrew had proved himself to be reliable and dedicated over the last few weeks. All right, she finally agreed. But I'll need to see the apartment first to feel more secure. Sure, Andrew replied promptly. How about we stop by after the museum today? I can show you the room I've prepared for Lucas. The afternoon continued with more exploring of the museum, Lucas alternating between holding both his parents' hands as they walked. To any outside observer, they looked like a normal family on a weekend outing, the complex reality of their situation invisible to the world. At the end of the day, when they went up to Andrew's apartment on the Upper East Side, Lucas immediately ran to the window, amazed by the view of Manhattan. It's like being in a spaceship, he exclaimed. Catherine walked silently through the apartment, noticing the subtle changes that indicated the preparation for the presence of a child. Protections on sockets, protected furniture corners, a small ladder in the bathroom for Lucas to reach the sink. When they reached the room prepared for Lucas, she stopped at the door, thrilled. The care and thought behind every detail was evident, from the solar system mural to the small science experiment area. Dad, is all this for me? Lucas asked, rushing over to the work table where a children's microscope was positioned. All yours, champ, Andrew confirmed, anxiously watching Catherine's reaction. You've really thought of everything, she commented softly. I've tried, he replied. I wanted to feel at home here too. The sun was beginning to set over the city, painting the sky in orange hues that were reflected in the windows of the skyscrapers. Lucas had found a book on scientific experiments and was engrossed in its pages, lying on the carpet that mimicked the surface of the moon. So, find it? Andrew asked when they were at the apartment door, preparing to say goodbye. Catherine nodded. I'll bring his things after school. The exhibition starts at 7 p.m. Don't worry, Andrew assured her. We'll be fine. Right, Lucas? Yes, the boy replied enthusiastically. Can we make a bicarbonate volcano like in the book? Andrew laughed. Sure, as long as you promise to help me clean up afterwards. As he watched Catherine and Lucas enter the elevator, Andrew felt a familiar pang of loss, the same he felt every time he had to say goodbye to them. But now there was hope mixed with longing and the promise of more moments together on the horizon. In his office later that night, Andrew found a drawing that Lucas had left on his desk, a colorful representation of him, Catherine and Lucas in front of the T-Rex skeleton. It was a simple image, made with crayons, but it carried the weight of all the dreams and possibilities that the future could hold. Friday arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness for everyone involved. Andrew spent the morning reorganizing ingredients for scientific experiments and triple-checking the security protections in his apartment. On his desk in the office, a detailed list of activities and emergency procedures occupied a space between million-dollar contracts. Michelle, he called to his assistant over the intercom, cancel my appointments for Monday morning. I need to take my son to school. There was a significant pause before the answer. Your son, sir? Andrew realized that, except for Catherine and Lucas's school, no one knew about his recent paternity. Yes, my son, Lucas, 5 years old. Each word carried a pride that he didn't even try to disguise. At 3 p.m. sharp, Catherine arrived with Lucas, carrying an Avengers backpack and a battered teddy bear called Professor Boar, a name that made Andrew laugh when he discovered that Lucas had chosen it after one of their conversations about science. "Remember the rules," Catherine was saying as she helped Lucas take off his coat. "Bedtime at 8:30, no sweets after dinner, and call you if you need anything," Lucas added, rolling his eyes in a way that was so reminiscent of Catherine that Andrew had to hold back a smile. Catherine spent the next 15 minutes showing Andrew where to find every item in Lucas' backpack, from his favorite Iron Man pajamas to the allergy medicine he rarely needed, but she included just in case. "Cat," Andrew interrupted her gently, "will be fine. I promise. You need to concentrate on your big night." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I know, it's the first time he spent the night away from you?" Catherine nodded, her eyes watering. "Since he was born, we've never spent a night apart." Andrew touched her arm lightly, a gesture of comfort that seemed all too natural. "He's with his father. I'm going to look after him like he's the most precious thing in the world, because he is." Lucas, oblivious to the emotional moment between his parents, was already settled in his new room, organizing his science books on the bookshelf. "All right," Catherine finally gave in. "Lucas, come give Mommy a kiss." The boy ran to hug her, and Andrew felt his heart squeeze at the sight of the pure love between mother and son. It was a painful reminder of the years he had lost, but also a promise of the future they could still build. After Catherine left, Andrew and Lucas began their father-son evening with the promised volcano experience. The apartment's state-of-the-art kitchen soon turned into a makeshift laboratory with baking soda, vinegar, and food coloring scattered across the marble counter. "Do you know why the volcano explodes?" Andrew asked as he helped Lucas measure out the ingredients. "Because the bicarbonate and vinegar make a chemical reaction," Lucas replied promptly. "It's like when you mix different colors and make a new color, only with foam." Andrew was impressed by the analogy. "Exactly. And did you know that there are real volcanoes that scientists study every day?" The conversation flowed naturally into geology, and before they knew it, they were Googling images of Yellowstone National Park while they waited for the pizza to arrive. During dinner, sitting on the living room floor overlooking the illuminated city, Lucas surprised Andrew with a question. "Dad, why didn't you live with us before?" Andrew swallowed, carefully placing his slice of pizza on his plate. "It's complicated, champ. Sometimes adults make mistakes and difficult decisions." "You didn't want to be my father?" "No," Andrew replied quickly, pulling Lucas close. "I just didn't know you existed. If I had, I would have been there from day one." Lucas processed the information in silence, playing with an olive on his plate. "But now you know." "Now I know," Andrew confirmed. "And I promise I'll be here for you from now on. Always." Later, after getting Lucas ready for bed, a process that involved 2 stories about astronauts in a negotiation about just 5 more minutes, Andrew sat on the sofa with a glass of wine, contemplating how his life had changed. His phone vibrated with a message from Catherine, a selfie of her in the gallery, beaming next to his works. Opening was a success. "How are things out there?" Andrew replied with a photo of Lucas sleeping peacefully, Professor Bohr tightly embraced. "Everything's under control. Your paintings are beautiful. Congratulations." There was a pause before the next message. "Thank you for everything." Andrew knew she wasn't just thanking him for looking after Lucas that night, but for all the little ways he was trying to make up for lost time. No pressure, no demands, just genuine love for his son. The soft sound of Lucas breathing echoed down the hallway, a constant reminder of Andrew's new reality. The lights of Manhattan flashed outside, but for the first time in years, the CEO of Bennett Technologies wasn't thinking about business, acquisitions, or profits. He was thinking about how his son's smile illuminated more than all the lights in the city put together, and how some bonds, even invisible for so long, can never truly be broken. The weekend went on with constant phone calls between Lucas and Catherine, each call bringing new stories about scientific experiments and discoveries made in his father's apartment. Andrew watched in amazement as his son turned every moment into a learning adventure. On Sunday afternoon, while organizing the mess from yet another experiment in the kitchen, this time involving milk, food coloring, and detergent, Andrew noticed that his roof had never looked so alive. The colorful stains on the counter and Lucas's laughter echoing through the previously silent corridors gave the space a soul he didn't even know it lacked. "Dad," Lucas called out, sitting on the special stool Andrew had bought for him to reach the sink. "Why do you live alone in this big house?" The question caught Andrew off guard. "Well, I've always been very busy with work. Busier than doing experiments?" Lucas frowned, his childish logic defying his adult priorities. "No," Andrew replied after a reflective pause. "Actually, I think I was busy with the wrong things." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Catherine had arrived to pick up Lucas, returning from a busy weekend with the exhibition. When she entered the apartment, her eyes widened at the state of the kitchen. "What happened here?" "Science," Lucas exclaimed proudly, running to hug her. "Dad taught me about surface tension." Catherine looked at Andrew with a mixture of amusement and surprise. He shrugged, smiling. At least this time, it didn't involve bicarbonate. As Lucas ran to gather his belongings, Catherine walked around the kitchen, noticing the signs of the experiment. "Your exhibition, how did it go?" "Surprisingly well," she replied, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "I sold 3 pieces at the opening." "That's incredible, Kat." Andrew found himself genuinely happy for her. "I always knew your talent would be recognized." The moment was interrupted by Lucas returning with his backpack and Professor Bohr. "Can we do more experiments next weekend?" Andrew looked at Catherine, hopeful. It was more than just a weekend request. It was a chance to establish a real routine with his son. "Actually," Catherine began, surprising them both, "I was thinking, maybe you could spend more time here during the week as well? After school?" Lucas's face lit up. "May I? I have some important meetings in the next few weeks," she explained, looking at Andrew. "If you can help with the afternoons?" "Of course," Andrew replied quickly, trying to contain his enthusiasm. "I can rearrange my schedule. Michelle is great at juggling appointments." The details were settled quickly. Andrew would pick Lucas up from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, in addition to the established Wednesdays. Catherine would pick him up after his art lessons at around 6 p.m. The following week, Bennett Technologies witnessed a surprising change in its CEO. Meetings that had previously stretched on indefinitely now ended punctually. Andrew delegated more responsibilities, relying on his experienced team, and his desk cut a picture frame with Lucas' photo in the museum. "Mr. Bennett?" Michelle entered his office one afternoon, looking slightly disconcerted. "There's a drawing for you at reception. Of your son?" Andrew smiled when he saw the drawing, a colorful representation of him in Lucas doing space experiments, as the caption said in a regular childish handwriting. He hung it proudly next to his diplomas and certifications. Afternoons with Lucas brought a new dimension to his life. He discovered that explaining complex scientific concepts in a simple way helped him even in his corporate presentations. The time he spent helping with his homework became sacred, more important than any board meeting. One afternoon, as they were walking home from school, Lucas made a remark that shook Andrew. "Did you know that Tommy in my class has 2 bedrooms? One at his mother's and one at his father's." "And how do you feel about that?" Andrew asked carefully. "I think it's cool," Lucas replied simply. "He said that way, he has 2 special places." The conversation planted a seed in Andrew's mind. That night, after leaving Lucas with Catherine, he started looking for apartments in Brooklyn, close to the school, in her art studio. A few days later, during one of the pizza dinners that had become a tradition, Andrew casually mentioned his idea to Catherine. "I'm thinking of buying a place closer," he said, while Lucas fiddled with his new telescope. "The Upper East Side is far from the school, and with the traffic," Catherine studied him for a moment. "You don't have to do this, Andrew." "I wanna," he replied simply. "I'm not doing this just for convenience. I want to be more present in his life, in all the little things." "The little things are the most important," Catherine commented softly, watching Lucas make meticulous notes about the stars he could see. "I learned that too late from you," Andrew said, his voice low. "I don't want to make the same mistake with him." The silence that followed carried the weight of 15 years of absence, but also the promise of a different future. Lucas called them to look at Jupiter through the telescope, and for a moment, standing side by side watching their son's enthusiasm, Andrew and Catherine allowed themselves to imagine how things could have been and how they could still be. Andrew's move to Brooklyn happened faster than any business merger he had ever conducted. In just 3 weeks, he found a sleek brownstone 10 minutes from Lucas' school with a small back garden perfect for outdoor experiments. "It's bigger than it needs to be," Catherine commented during the initial visit, looking at the 3 floors of the traditional house. "The first floor could be transformed into a study and laboratory space for Lucas," Andrew explained, already visualizing the modifications. "And there's a studio in the attic with perfect natural lighting for me?" Catherine asked in surprise. "For your art classes," he quickly clarified. "I thought it might be useful when Lucas is here, so as not to interrupt his normal schedule." The practicality of the suggestion couldn't completely mask the hope in his voice, but Catherine chose not to comment. Instead, she followed Lucas, who was already excitedly exploring every room. "Dad, can we get a telescope on the roof?" he asked, his green eyes sparkling with possibilities. "Tommy said you can see Saturn better when it's higher up." The move brought subtle changes to the dynamic of the unconventional little family. Afternoons with Lucas naturally extended into casual dinners, with Catherine often joining them after her art classes. Physical proximity made everything more fluid, more natural. One evening, while Lucas was doing his homework at his new study table, Catherine was helping Andrew organize the makeshift lab they were setting up. "Remember that time in a chemistry lab?" she asked, smiling as she unpacked test tubes. "When you almost set your eyebrow on fire?" "How could I forget?" Andrew laughed. "You dragged me to the infirmary even though I insisted I was fine." "And I was," she finished. "You only lost half your eyebrow." Lucas looked up from his notebook. "Dad burned off his eyebrow." "Your mother exaggerates," Andrew defended himself, casting an amused glance at Catherine. "It was just a scorch. That's why we always do experiments with supervision," Catherine added, seizing the moment for a safety lesson. The domesticity of these moments sometimes caught Andrew off guard. It was as if the universe was giving him a taste of what could have been, of what could still be, whispered a hopeful voice in his mind. Fall progressed, and with it came the first school presentations. Lucas had an important role in the science fair, presenting a project on solar energy that he had developed with Andrew's help. On the night of the presentation, the auditorium at Marlborough Elementary was packed with proud parents. Andrew and Catherine sat side by side, tension and anticipation shared as they waited for Lucas' turn. "What if he gets nervous?" Catherine whispered, twisting the program in her hands. "They'll be fine," Andrew assured her, resisting the urge to hold her hand. "We've rehearsed this dozens of times." Lucas took to the stage with confidence, his small homemade solar panel working perfectly to power a series of colored LEDs. His clear and enthusiastic explanation drew smiles from the judges. "That's our son," Andrew murmured, his chest heaving with pride. Catherine looked at him, surprised by the intimacy of those words. "Our son." It was the first time they had expressed their shared connection through Lucas so clearly. After the presentation, while Lucas proudly showed his project to his classmates, Andrew and Catherine found themselves in conversation with other parents. "You make a lovely family," commented one mother, smiling warmly. Before they could correct the misunderstanding, Lucas ran up to them, holding up his first-place certificate. "Look, we won." "You won, champ," Andrew corrected, but Lucas shook his head. "No, we won. You helped me with the science, and Mom made the panel look nice with the right colors. We're a team." The simplicity of the children's logic caught them off guard. Catherine felt her eyes water, and Andrew huffed to disguise his own excitement. Later, celebrating with ice cream, vanilla with caramel syrup for Andrew, mint with chocolate for Catherine, and a combination of the two for Lucas, Andrew watched his son excitedly explain his plans for the next project. "I want to do something about black holes," Lucas declared between spoonfuls. "We can use the new roof to study the sky." "I think we'll need more than the roof to study black holes," Catherine smiled. "We can go to the planetarium," Lucas suggested. As a family, the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken possibilities. Andrew and Catherine exchanged glances, years of history and hurt mixed with something new, something that looked dangerously like hope. "Like a family," Andrew repeated softly, testing the words. Catherine didn't reply, but her gaze lingered a little longer than necessary on Andrew's face before turning back to her ice cream. Outside the ice cream parlor, The lights of Brooklyn twinkled against the night sky, and somewhere above them, invisible through the city's light pollution, the stars continued their eternal dance. Just as the three of them continued their own delicate dance of reconnection and healing. The planetarium of the American Museum of Natural History had never looked so magical as it did on that December night. Lucas, sitting between Andrew and Catherine, could barely contain his excitement as the projected stars danced above their heads. The promise of a family visit had turned into reality, and Andrew couldn't help noticing how relaxed Catherine looked next to him, her soft perfume mingling with the aroma of popcorn that Lucas had insisted on buying. "There," Lucas pointed excitedly. "That's the constellation of Orion, just like in the book you gave me, Dad. And do you know why it's special?" Andrew asked, joining in the familiar game of questions and answers they had developed. "Because there's the Orion Nebula," Lucas answered promptly. "It's where the stars are born." Catherine smiled in the dim light. "Just like your science project on the stellar cycle?" The project had been Lucas' idea, inspired by his nights of observation on the roof of Andrew's new house. In recent weeks, father and son had transformed the space into a small observatory, complete with star charts and a more powerful telescope. After the presentation, as they walked through the brightly lit Central Park for dinner, Lucas ran ahead, stopping occasionally to examine something interesting along the way. "He's really blossoming," Catherine commented, adjusting her scarf against the December chill. "Mrs. Anderson says he's years ahead in science." "It's all that extra time in the lab," Andrew joked, but his chest puffed out with pride. "Although I suspect his artistic talent comes entirely from you." Catherine laughed softly. "Have you seen the diagrams he made for the project? They're incredibly detailed for a 5-year-old. 6, Andrew corrected automatically. Lucas's birthday was approaching, and he was already planning a special celebration. "About that," Catherine began, hesitantly, "I was thinking, maybe we could do something together this year? A party in your garden, perhaps? The space is perfect, and with the new lab—" "Of course," Andrew replied, perhaps a little too quickly. "I can organize everything. We could do a science and art theme, combine what he loves most." "Andrew," Catherine interrupted gently, "you don't have to make up for all the missed birthdays at once." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "It's not that, Cat. It's just that every moment with him is precious. Every smile, every discovery. And when I see the two of you together—" "Dad, Mom, look." Lucas's voice cut through the moment. He pointed to a street artist who was making giant soap bubbles, their iridescent shapes floating against the dark sky. "Can we try this at home?" Lucas asked, his eyes sparkling with scientific possibilities. "Of course we can," Andrew replied. "It's all about surface tension and light refraction." "And beauty," Catherine added, watching the bubbles dance. "Sometimes science and art mix perfectly." Dinner was at Lucas' favorite, a small Italian restaurant where the chef always made a point of showing him how the pasta was made. While his son watched the demonstration in fascination, Andrew and Catherine found themselves alone at the table. "About the anniversary," Andrew resumed the conversation, "I really want to do something special, not to make up for the past, but to celebrate the present." Catherine studied his face for a moment. "You've changed, you know that?" "What do you mean?" "The Andrew I knew in college, he was always chasing the next goal, the next achievement. Now you seem more present," he suggested. "At peace," she added. The silence that followed was interrupted by Lucas returning with animated stories about fermentation and the process of making dough. As they watched him, Andrew thought about how his son had completely changed his life. The board meetings that once dominated his days now had to compete with science experiments and bedtime stories. "Tomorrow is meteor night," Lucas announced over dessert. "Can we watch from the roof?" Catherine hesitated. "Honey, it's going to be really cold. I've installed heaters on the deck," Andrew informed her. "And I have extra blankets. We can make hot chocolate, turn it into a special evening." Lucas looked expectantly at his mother, his green eyes, Andrew's eyes, pleading silently. "All right," she relented, smiling, "but you need to finish all your homework first." Lucas's face lit up with a joy that made Andrew's heart squeeze. It was in these moments that the pain of the lost years hit him hardest, but it was also these moments that reminded him of how much he still had ahead of him. Later, as they walked back to Catherine's car, Lucas between them holding their hands, Andrew felt a peace he had never experienced in his years of corporate success. The empire he had built seemed small compared to the universe he was discovering through his son's eyes. "Dad," Lucas called sleepily from the back seat during the drive. "Are shooting stars really wishes?" "Well, scientifically speaking, they're just meteors entering the Earth's atmosphere," Andrew began, but stopped when he saw Catherine's gaze in the rearview mirror. "But sometimes, when you wish for something really hard, the universe finds a way to surprise you." Lucas's 6th birthday party transformed the garden at Andrew's house into a scientific artistic playground. Small experiment stations distributed around the space allowed the children to create colorful lava with oil and water, while a painting area, organized by Catherine, offered the opportunity to create cosmic art with fluorescent paints. Andrew watched as his son ran from one station to another, enthusiastically explaining scientific principles to his friends with a confidence surprising for his 6 years. Catherine had gone all out with the cake, a fond model of the solar system that was too pretty to cut. "He really has inherited the best of both of you," commented Michelle, whom Andrew had surprisingly invited to the party. His assistant had become an important ally in recent months, helping him balance his corporate life with his parental responsibilities. "It's strange," Andrew replied, watching Catherine help a group of children with their chromatography experiments. "Sometimes it feels like these 6 months have been more meaningful than the previous 15 years of business success." The party continued until dusk, when the last guests began to leave. Lucas, exhausted but happy, slept on the sofa in the living room, cuddled up to his newest treasure, a professional microscope, a joint gift from his parents. "I think we did it," Catherine smiled, taking a seat next to Andrew on the back deck. The December sky was exceptionally clear, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "We've done more than that," Andrew replied, handing her a cup of tea. "Kat, there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him curiously, recognizing the serious tone in his voice. "I found some documents in my father's office," he began, "about your father and the alleged fraud." Catherine stiffened visibly. "Andrew, they were fake," he continued softly. "My father fabricated everything. There was no case, no real evidence. He just manipulated us." The silence that followed was heavy, with 15 years of regrets and lost possibilities. Catherine placed her cup on the table with trembling hands. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know the truth." And because he hesitated, gathering his courage. "Because over the last few months, watching you with Lucas, I've realized that I've never stopped." "Dad?" Lucas's sleepy voice interrupted the moment. He was standing at the deck door, rubbing his eyes. "Can we see the stars before we go?" Catherine stood up quickly, grateful for the interruption. "It's getting late, honey. We have to go home." "Actually," Andrew interjected, "I installed that new heating system on the deck. And tomorrow is Sunday. If you want, we could." "Please, Mom," Lucas begged. "We could see if we can find Venus." Catherine looked at her son, then at Andrew, and something in her heart gave way. "All right, but just a little." Lucas ran to fetch his astronomical notebook while Andrew adjusted the telescope. Catherine wrapped herself in one of the available blankets, watching father and son work together with a natural attunement. "Did you know that Venus is called the morning star?" Lucas explained excitedly. "Even though it's not a star." "And why isn't it a star?" Andrew asked, keeping their game of questions and answers alive. "Because it has no light of its own. It only reflects the light of the sun, like the moon." Catherine smiled, remembering her own study nights at college, when Andrew helped her understand scientific concepts in exchange for lessons on Renaissance art. The hours passed gently as they explored the night sky together. Lucas fell asleep on Catherine's lap, his notebook still open on her lap. "He's amazing," Andrew murmured, adjusting the blanket over his sleeping son. "He is," Catherine agreed. "And it's scary how much he looks like you when he's concentrating." "Kat, about what I was saying before." "I know," she interrupted softly. "And I can't say I haven't thought about it too. But it's complicated." "Life is complicated," Andrew replied. "But for the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I want." Catherine looked at Lucas, then at the stars above. 15 years is a long time, Andrea. And yet, Here we are, under the same stars. A movement in the sky caught both their attention. A meteor cutting through the night in a brilliant arc. Make a wish, Catherine whispered, more to herself than to Andrew. He looked at her in the soft glow of the deck lights. I don't need to. Everything I could wish for is right here. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. No longer laden with regrets, but with possibilities. Lucas shifted in his sleep, mumbling something about nebulae. We could try, Catherine finally said, her voice almost a whisper. Not for us, but for all of us, Andrew added, understanding perfectly. Above them, the stars continued their eternal dance, silent witnesses to a new beginning. Lucas slept peacefully, unaware of how his love of science and the stars had somehow realigned the constellations of his family's destiny. In there, on the deck of a house in Brooklyn, under a December sky full of promise, three hearts began to beat to a new rhythm, no longer separated by distance and time, but united by the same gravitational force that keeps the planets in their orbits: love.